All right, so for those of you that might not be familiar with what our service does, we're going to be returning fees for your AMC, title, settlement, recording fees, and transfer taxes. We're going to provide you accurate data based on your property's location, and a compliance certificate will be generated with each file you run through our service. And we do stand behind the accuracy of our database with that compliance certificate. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with the purchase transaction. And if you guys have any noise in the background, you might want to mute your phone so we can make this a clean recording for everyone. That would be appreciated. So if you look at the screen right now, I am on the borrower summary origination page, and I've got just the basic information entered that I need to pull rates and fees from our system. So as you can see, I don't have any of the borrower information as it relates to where they are employed or what their income is. I'm more or less looking at the subject property and the loan information. So I've got my subject property address entered, my property type, estimated and appraised value. I have the purpose of my loan selected as a purchase, and I know this has been a pain point for some of your users. So the purpose of the loan, that cannot change once you access our service. We mirrored this rule based off of the HMDA rules, where if your borrower is changing the transaction, a new application is technically required. And so we've mirrored our system after that. So if you access our service with the file as a purchase, it stays as a purchase, and the only way you can update our cert for it to reflect a refinance would be if you were to create a new Encompass file. And the same goes for as if you accidentally go to our service with it as a refi and then it becomes a purchase, that's going to require an updated Encompass file as well. You are allowed to go back and forth from cash out to no cash out because the purpose of the loan is staying the same as a refinance. So that's something that you want to keep in mind and be mindful of prior to coming to our service, that you have the purpose of the loan correctly selected. I have my property type as primary, and then I've got it conventional first, fixed, and then I've got my loan amount and my purchase price entered in there as well as I normally would for any file. Now take note that I am leaving my estimated close date blank, and I'm doing that for a reason so that when we go to our service I can display or show to you how our system works with that. Any questions before I export into our service? Okay, so once you're ready to actually access our service, I believe that you have a different button built into your Encompass. However, I'm going to go through what our normal path is, which is order additional services, and then I'm going to select our service from that pop-up box. And then it'll take me directly into our system. And I'm going to land on the Questions tab. But real briefly, I do want to bring you over to the File Data tab so you can see how this information is coming over from Encompass. You can see my transaction type is hard-coded. I cannot change that. My closing settlement date, I had that blank in Encompass, but now that I've come through to our service, it's updated that for me. And the default will be to update it to 60 days out from the date that you're originally accessing our system. So if you want to make changes to that, you can click on this box and make changes. Be aware, though, anytime you are making updates to this File Data tab, we do not rewrite this information back into Encompass. We are simply writing the information back to the itemization and to the SSPL and to page 2 of the LE, which actually gets populated based on what's loaded into the itemization. So those are really the only two pages we're writing information back to. So if you're changing the address or the loan type or the property type in our system, it is not going to update that in Encompass. You want to make sure you're making those changes in Encompass first, saving your file, and then coming back into our system. So I'm going to go back to the Questions tab, which is where I would have normally landed. And it's going to ask you to enter in the appraisal product that you want to select for your transaction. So I'm going to go ahead and select my 1073. We also have this Customize section here that I highly advise users to click open and make sure that these defaulted title and settlement questions are being answered correctly for your transaction. You'll see that we have questions as it relates to the title update fee, after hours or out of office closing, power of attorney, and document signing fees. So I don't want to make any changes to those as of right now, so I'm going to go ahead and continue to the fees. And this is going to take me to the fees tab. And it can take a moment depending on your connection, which mine looks like it's a little bit slow today. All right, so here we've got our AMC and we've got our title and settlement providers, and then underneath that you're going to see the recording fees and transfer taxes. Now for the AMC piece, in the questions tab, you're going to select the base product that's needed for the transaction, but if there are other items that need to be selected for your transaction, you would want to click on that details link, and then you're going to select any of the additional documents or items that would be needed for your appraisal, whether that be a trip charge, if it's a geodesic or earth home, if you have the need for a 1007 or the 216, you can select them here. And when you make those selections, it's going to increase that cost, and you would just save that to your file. So any additional items that you need to select for your appraisal, you definitely want to do that via the details link versus doing it via the product and the questions tab. And you have an exclusive list of AMC providers that you would be able to select from. Now, as it relates to title and settlement, we also have this, it looks like, as a state-specific list for you guys that's exclusive to only your providers. If you wanted to see who else was available for doing this transaction if what we return to you is not who you were expecting, you can click the Select Provider, and the system will return to you all of the other corporate preferred providers that are available for that subject property based on what we have in our system. And if you wanted to switch that out, you would simply click that Add to File button, and it's going to switch out that provider for you. And you have the same functionality for settlement services. If the provider that we've returned is not who you want to select, you can hit Select Provider, and the system will return to you the other providers within your corporate preferred list that you would be able to choose from. Now, you are not open to the network, so you would only be able to access the providers that have been approved to be in the list. Now, you also see that we have a details link for title and settlement as well. So if you were to click on that, we'll do title first. All right, so here is the rate card. What you are going to be seeing for a purchase transaction is our lender's policy. We're going to have a disclosed amount and an actual amount. And the disclosed amount incorporates the simultaneous issuance premium, and that's trade compliant, so that's what we are sending back. Now, there are other we have the ability rather to list the actual amounts, so that if you needed to calculate cash to close in certain instances, you're going to see the actual amounts display here. Now, we are working with First American to get that updated so it would look a little bit different when you go to access the system, but we will have the actual amounts here for you. Now, we do not guarantee the actual amounts. They're not going to be on the compliance cert, and we're not going to send it back to the LOS. What we do guarantee, what we do put on the cert, and what we do send back to the LOS is the disclosed TRID compliant amount. Now, as it relates to the provider, we are selecting the smart fees and smart endorsements. So I had indicated that this was a condo on my export into the system. So it's picking up on that condo endorsement for me, so I don't have to come in here and select that, which is nice. And if there were any additional policies that I wanted to choose from, so if in the event the provider is quoting me an expanded versus extended, I could go ahead and select that policy type, and you're going to see that the figures are going to update accordingly to that specific policy. Now, what the system is going to do is return what's standard or customary for that area as it relates to the policies. And if you have the discretion to change what that is for your Smart GFE or SmartLE, you can come in here and make those necessary changes. Now, also, too, for any of the providers you're working with, the way that we load rates, you may or may not be familiar with the address that's being listed here for that provider. If you are going to actually be ordering your title and settlement through that provider, but maybe at a different address, and you want to make sure that we are returning the correct pricing for that address, you can click on this locations link, and it's going to tell you all of the provider offices that have this exact same pricing, so that you can rest assured use our service knowing that we are capturing the right rates and fees for the office that you are going to select. However, the way that we load these into our system is under one specific main address, but you can check for the locations that are applicable to this pricing listed here, which may be helpful for some users who work with providers that have more than one office. And that same functionality exists for settlement services. I'm going to click on the details link, and it's going to give me all of the fees that are being pre-selected for me. So again, I don't have to come in here and select them on each transaction. And then underneath title and settlement, you're going to see the recording fees and transfer taxes. Now the recording fees are displayed, and we have our RESPA compliant page count defaults attached to all of our recording documents. However, if you have any questions on how we're coming up with those figures, or if you're concerned that they are not correct, you can always reach out to our support desk at support@closing.com, along with the SmartLE ID number, which you would find right here on the file summary box, and let them know your concerns for the fees that we're returning, and they'll be able to get back with you as to how we came up with those figures. The next section is for our transfer taxes, and we do have a Who Pays rule enabled that is turned on for your company, and it's set to 100% borrower. So with the feature turned on, you're going to see this edit split link pop up. However, what we will do is default the transfer taxes 100% to the borrower side. And if in the event you needed to split that based on what you have listed in your purchase contract, you would click Edit Split, and then you would come in here and put in what that split was based on that specific transaction. Now, if you make any adjustments to the split, I always recommend clicking this Log Tax Splits box. That way, if you do come back into the file for any changed circumstance, we're going to keep that split at 50% for you versus reverting to what the configuration is at 100% borrower. I'll save this, and it'll take me back to my Fees tab. So once I've confirmed all the providers I would like to have are selected, I've reviewed all of the details, I've split my transfer taxes, I'm ready to export back into my Encompass file. You'll notice that there's two Export to Encompass buttons, and they both have the same functionality, so it doesn't matter which one you select, it's always going to do the same thing. Now, I would highly caution that you wait for this box to pop up that tells you that your data has been imported. If you rush back to your file without waiting for that pop-up, you could affect the export that comes back through. So we just recommend that you wait for it. There we go. Now I can hit OK, and I'm going to come back directly into my loan and into my 2015 itemization. And right away, I'm going to go ahead and save my file after my export. And that's just to ensure that all of the information that I've selected from our service is going to populate into the itemization and the LE accordingly. So as I scroll down, I'm going to see my appraisal fee listed in line 804, just as I would have anticipated. And if I scroll down to my 1100 series, I've got my title provider listed with their title fees, and I've got my settlement service provider with their servicing fees listed there as well. And then for recording fees and transfer taxes, I have that listed out. Now I did split at 50-50 in my system, so it is coming back as 50-50 here as well. So you would see that being displayed as you've had it split in our service. If I go to page 2 of my loan estimate, I'm going to have my recording fees and transfer taxes listed in their appropriate fields, as well as my appraisal fee. I have my owner's title listed as H for other in my configuration. And then here we've got the rest of our settlement and title fees for the services the borrower can shop for. If I go into my E folder, I am going to find my compliance certificate. So I'm going to open that up. Each compliance certificate is going to have that SmartLE ID number listed for you there as well, so you don't have to come into our service to get it. It's going to have the property information as well as the transaction information that it pulled from Encompass. Underneath that, you're going to see the recording fee and transfer taxes, and you'll notice that on each fee that's returned, we are going to be given a date and a timestamp, and that's to signify that on this date and at this time, these fees are true and correct based on the information that you have entered. Now you'll see the recording fees are listed there, but our transfer taxes are not split. We only guarantee the total amount of transfer tax that's due. It's still going to be up to you, the user, to make sure that you're disclosing the split according to the purchase contract. We do not guarantee the split. There's no way that our service would be able to know what's negotiated in each purchase contract, so we are only guaranteeing the total amount that's due. So something to be aware of. Underneath that, you're going to see the recording information, the county office, recorder's office, our page count defaults, and then if there were any tax criteria questions that needed to be answered, you would see them listed underneath the recording department information and how your user answered those questions. Underneath that, you will see the provider information where we will list out the service of the provider, the company and their address, again their date and timestamp, and the information listed in their rate card that was applicable to your file. And that same functionality exists for settlement and for title as well. They each have their date and timestamp along with the company information and contact and what's listed in the rate card. Now, since this is a purchase, I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate a change circumstance since we've already run the file once. I'm going to go ahead and increase my loan amount slightly. And then I'm going to save my file. Notice how when I went into my service to SmartLE initially, it selected a closing date for me. But again, because we don't write back to the borrower summary, that closing date didn't come back into the service. So had I selected that settlement date in SmartLE and I saved it, I would want to come back here and update this to that date. So that it's consistent, again, because we're not writing back to this section. We're only writing back to the 2015 itemization and the SSPL. So I saved my file. I'm going to go ahead and come back into my system. And it's the same process that you would normally take for purchase, for refinance, for change circumstance. You always want to go to your process of getting to our system. And then you're going to go back in. Okay, so since this is the second time that I've come back into the file, I am going to see that I've got this box popping up telling me I need to re-export my data because the fees have changed. I'm going to come back into my questions tab briefly, verify my loan amount did update, so that was nice. I'm also going to state that yes, I'm going to need a power of attorney for this transaction. So I'm going to go ahead and continue to fees, changing that power of attorney question to yes. Now you're going to see my power of attorney recording charge listed here. If my provider also had a processing fee for coordinating that power of attorney that they had given us, you would see that listed here in the details link, and that would have been pre-selected for you. Also, let's say on this purchase transaction I needed to order a pest inspection. So to do that, I would come up to this Add Additional Services button, and I would select Pest Inspection from the drop-down. And once I hit Select Provider, the system's going to return to me a pest inspector closest to the subject property. And the same functionality exists for our inspection and other services as it does for title, settlement, and for AMC. If you want to see who else is available to service the subject property, you can hit Select Provider, and it's going to return who else we have available. And it looks like in this area of the subject property, we have one provider available, and that would be Terminex. And there's no limit to how many inspection providers that you can have on your fees tab. If you needed to also have a roof inspection or a well and septic inspection, you could do that as well. All right. And notice I did update my loan amount, but my split stayed the same at 50-50, which is what I had expected. So I've updated my loan amount, I've added my power of attorney, and I've added my pest inspection. So now I can go back and export this to Encompass, and I can do that by clicking on the blue button. And I'm going to wait for my pop-up that says my data has been imported correctly. Okay. And now I can come back into my loan, into my 2015 itemization. And again, you always want to save it after you export. Now you can come back into our service for 180 days after you first initially run a SmartLE on your file. After 180 days, the system will view the file as being dated, and you would have to create a new Encompass file to re-access a compliance certificate. So keep in mind you can go in for as many times as you want for 180 days. Now as I scroll down, I'm going to have my other recording fees listed here for that power of attorney. And if I come into my eDoc folder, I'm going to have a secondary compliance certificate. It's going to have, again, the Smart Chiefy ID number. It's going to have my updated loan amount, my recording fees and transfer taxes. I've got an updated timestamp. But if I scroll down to my AMC, you can see that the timestamp did not change because there was nothing within the file that we updated that affected the AMC rate, so that stays the same. Now our title and settlement fee did increase, so we've got an updated timestamp for that as well. So again, you can come in for 180 days and make as many necessary changes to your file that you need to. And then if I come back over to the SSPL, I'm going to see the providers that I had selected in our system are now listed here in my SSPL as I would have expected, with the necessary information listed underneath for what type of provider they are and their address and information. So that is the display or the demonstration for a purchase transaction. While I get the refinance transaction up on the screen, does anyone have any questions up to this point?
No.
Okay. All right. So this is a refinance transaction. And again, as you can see, I have got just the bare information necessary that I need to pull rates and fees from SmartLE. And the information is as it relates to the subject property and for the loan information. I've got this listed as a cash out refi, primary, ARM, first, conventional, and this time I have my estimated closing date listed in there as well as my loan amount. So I'm going to go ahead and save the file again. And then I'm going to come back into my path for accessing our service. All right, so here we are on our File Data tab. As you can see, the closing settlement date, it did populate that there for me, so that's great. Now there are going to be some instances where the subject property that you enter in, the system is going to need you to tell it where its county or state, the county or taxing authority, depending on what location of the nation that you're in. And the reason the system does that is we geocode based on the zip code. We don't do an actual rooftop geocoding. And so there are some areas within the country where there's overlapping zip codes and overlapping taxing authorities. So in the instance where you have a property that has an overlapping zip code, you need to determine for the system which county that actually falls in. So I'm going to go ahead and select Clark in this instance, and then I'm going to continue to the Questions tab. Now here what we see is a little bit different because it's as it relates to a refinance versus a purchase. So we've got the streamline refinance, the cash out refinance question listed here that we would need to answer, but it is pulling that over from Encompass. So as you can see, I had that listed as a cash out refinance in Encompass, and it's entered that correctly in on this Questions tab. Again, I'm going to select my appraisal product type, which is a 1004. And then here we have a tax criteria question that relates to the quitclaim deed. And it asks if individuals are being added to or removed from the property title. The default on this is to no. However, if you do have somebody that's coming on or off of title and you select yes, you're going to see an additional box pop up that does need to be answered. Now we have a hover over as well as this little icon box that you can click on, and basically it states depending on where the property is located and depending on the specifications of the file, there may or may not be a taxable value that's being transferred. And in some instances it's absolutely valid and correct to put in 0. However, I would advise against 0 being your default because that's going to have a direct reflection on what we return to you in transfer taxes. And if in the event a tolerance violation happens and this question is not answered correctly, then that portion of the compliance guarantee is not going to be valid. So you do want to make sure you're answering this correctly. I'll leave this as no for now, and I'll come back in and demonstrate that as yes in a moment. In our Customize section, we have the same defaulted title and settlement questions as we had before for the purchase. In addition, we have some questions as it relates to it being a refinance. The first refinance question is number of liens. It's important to note that our system does take into consideration that this is a refinance. However, if the borrower is paying off a second lien and they need to have a release for their recording documents, they would put in 1. So they need 1 additional release of lien. So they're paying off 1 lien. So that's how you would answer that question. Subordination agreements. If your borrower is submitting a subordination agreement to another bank, say B of A or Chase, and you want to have that accommodated for the recording charge, you could go ahead and enter that in here. What we will be returning for you is the recording charge and the provider's servicing charge for that subordination agreement. We do not house all of the bank's individual fees for submitting the subordination. So you would still need to manually enter that into your file as you currently are doing today. But what we would do is return the provider fee and the recording fee. And then accommodation payoffs. If you're unfamiliar with what an accommodation payoff is, if the borrower is paying off a credit card or a car loan debt with their refinance and your provider charges additional for coordinating those extra payoffs, you would want to indicate that here, and what we would do is return that provider's fee for accommodating those additional payoffs. Now here we have some tax criteria questions again that we default for you and based on where the property is located. In this case we're being asked if the lender is a federal or Georgia credit union, if the borrower is refinancing with the original lender who owns the note, and the unpaid principal amount of the loan that's being refinanced. So you want to make sure that those questions are being answered as it relates to your file. And then you can move forward. And here we have the Fees tab where we'll see appraisal, title settlement, and then again the recording fees and transfer taxes. And there's really nothing different for the functionality of our system between a refinance and a purchase as it relates to taking a look at the details link or taking a look at the select provider link. So if you're ever going back and looking at files that you've run for quotes and you do not see a compliance certificate, chances are that means it was not exported back into Encompass or the property address was not filled out and therefore no compliance certificate was generated. We also have an audit log, so if you have multiple people working on the same file, we will be keeping track of who's making changes. So you can see the date, the item that changed, the old and the new value, and who it was that changed it. And this can be helpful for users that have multiple people working in on the same file. If you scroll to the bottom, you're going to see a Contact Us link. If you click on that, then you can reach out to our support desk, but you could also do that directly, again, at support. And into my 2015 itemization. And then I'm going to save my file. Great. And I can scroll down and I will see all of the fees that were coming back from the system. So we've got title, settlement, recording fees and transfer taxes that were applicable. On page 2 of my loan estimate, again, I've got those fees in the areas I would expect to see them in. And my SSPL has got the providers listed. And my eDoc folder has the compliance certificate with the information on there that I would expect it to have. So that's how you would run a purchase, a change circumstance, and a refinance in our system. At this time, does anyone have any questions?
No.